Okay, we're moving on to the next panel, which is the title of which is What Infrastructure Will Power the Digital Economy and How Will We Get There? I'm just going to quickly introduce the moderator, and he will take it from there. The moderator for this panel is Jonathan Make, who is executive editor of Warren Communications, and you may see his byline frequently in Com Daily and elsewhere. And Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everyone. We're going to kind of make this a lightning round. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave here at a minute or two before 10:10 a.m. to catch a flight. I apologize. It's just that we had to do the scheduling. I want to encourage audience questioning at any time. If you have a question, be easiest for you just to stand up. We're going to kind of dispense with the slide I/O, so sorry for those who are watching virtually. Starting from right here, we have Frank Louthan.
Louthan, close.
Louthan. He's an analyst and managing director at Raymond James. We have next to him Rebecca Arbogast. She's a senior vice president of global public policy at Comcast. We have next to her Lee Duo. She is president of the China Academy of Information and Communications Technology. And then we have next to her David Young. He's vice president of Verizon Public Policy. And then we have at the end Larry Downs. He is the project director of the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. So the topic here is digital infrastructure, and I kind of took some liberties with that. We're going to range kind of widely about questions regarding the internet and technology, including, of course, digital infrastructure. I'd like to open with a question. We're going to give each of the panelists, an opportunity to weigh in on what their institutions are doing regarding digital infrastructure or how they're experts in this area. So if you don't mind, we'll start with you and what you do as an analyst.
Yeah, great. So thank you very much for having me here. My name's Frank Louthan. I'm the senior analyst at Raymond James covering wireline, telecom, cable, and data centers. Just a side note, any companies we'll talk about today, I do not own any shares of stock. Raymond James may have business relationships with those companies. If you're interested in more details of that, feel free to see me later. But we're basically in the business. Our firm, as to what I do specifically is I analyze the businesses. So I make recommendations to investors, both to our retail, primarily to our institutional investors. So any of your mutual funds or 401ks, I probably talk to their portfolio managers, and we make recommendations based on what we think the investment case is there. With that, I have to analyze a lot of this digital infrastructure and where people are deploying capital and whether they're getting adequate returns for it. And so I spend a lot of time looking at public policy issues as it relates a lot of the regulated industries, and we all see it tie around data. I mean, that's sort of where if you look at everything we'll end up talking about in this panel about digital infrastructure, it ends up all about data and how the carriers have shifted to more of a data-centric world. And then the data centers that I cover and how they play in. And then the other side is Raymond James as a firm is involved in raising capital for these for these firms, doing public offerings and so forth, and making trading markets and that. So I have a slightly different role than some of the actual service providers, but I follow Comcast and Verizon and all the others there as well. But that's sort of my role, is to advise investors on what I think, how the businesses are doing, who's deploying capital the best, and where the best investment returns are.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Comcast, NBC, what we're doing to promote digital networks is we're investing, we're innovating, we're walking the walk. A couple of weeks ago, we announced that we now have 1 gigabit network speeds throughout our entire footprint, which is when the confetti is supposed to fall from the ceiling here. A lot of attention is paid to speeds, but I would say equally we need to be focusing on capacity. They're obviously very highly correlated and related, but on the capacity side, we double our capacity about every 18 to 24 months. And the reason for that is we need to stay ahead. Just like we need to stay ahead of speeds, we need to stay ahead of capacity as well. And so although we've hit that 1 gigabit speed accomplishment, we're still continuing to look at what the next wave of demands are going to be on the network, what the next use cases are going to be, what consumers are going to want. Haven't stopped. Cable Labs has announced that they're doing some new specs on something that's probably felicitously named something with DOCSIS 3. We're not the best namers on this. I think it's full duplex DOCSIS 3.1. I think it just trips off the tongue, which will give us more speed and more capacity. And then we're pushing fiber deep into the network. So we obviously have a hybrid network, and in the same, gradually, we're pushing fiber deeper into the network, which gives us more control, more reliability over the network, more ability to control what's happening in there. And then in-home, we're doing really incredible things on the Wi-Fi network. So we now have a dashboard that you can use either in-home or out of home that lets you bust your kids if they're using devices when they should be asleep or should be doing homework, so you can turn off devices. It gives you that control. And we're also doing gateways, in-home gateways on Wi-Fi that allow you to have, at least in technical testing, 1 gigabit networks inside the home. So we're doing a lot of the deployment and the innovation, the investment into that in-home Wi-Fi based network too.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Lee, can you tell us about your expertise, I guess, as it applies to China?
Yeah. CICT, I think, is a technology research academy. And firstly, it's a think tank of the China and for the new technologies on ICT area, and also to play a very important role in the new technology experiment, such as 5G and the next generation network. All of the new technologies we will responsible for developing standards and also to put some deployment for the operators. So this is our role of the CICT. And for the digital economy, we also have a lot of studies for the new technologies, how to input and to the digital economy, how to push forward the digital economy in China. So I'm very glad to attend this forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You want to tell us what Verizon is doing?
Great, thank you. As many of you probably know, Verizon builds networks, and we deployed the first fiber to the home network on scale beginning about 13 years ago. We were about 10 years ago the first to deploy 4G LTE, and we're very proud of the fact that that has led to U.S. leadership in mobile broadband, and in particular enabled the app economy that has produced so many wonderful benefits for us and for society. And we're now leading the way in deploying the next generation of wireless technology, and that's 5G. And we've announced that we'll be deploying 5G to 4 cities this year: Sacramento, Los Angeles, Houston, and Indianapolis, with mobile 5G services beginning next year. So we're very excited to see what 5G will enable and the benefits that are going to flow from that.
Okay, thank you. And Larry, you want to tell us about your research as it applies here?
Sure. Thank you. And by the way, I want to thank TPI and Scott in particular for having me back here this year. It's always great fun. So it may not come as a huge surprise to a lot of you. Georgetown is not a big deployer of networks, so not a lot there. But my own work has been focused for a long time on the impact of networks on innovation, on disruptive technologies in particular. So that's led us to, in the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy, to look at a lot of issues, including investment in infrastructure, regulation of infrastructure, the digital divide. And I think the best way to sort of sum up at least my personal philosophy as someone who actually lives in Silicon Valley, even though I work with Georgetown, is that I sort of see everything through the lens of what Robert Metcalfe called, well, we now call Metcalfe's law, which he coined many years ago, which is that the value of any network is the sum of the square. Sorry, this value. I read it. The value of a network is the square of its users, and value you can measure any way you want. But the bottom line is as networks grow, the value that they deliver increases exponentially, and so that means that the more infrastructure you can get the more people that you can get onto the network, the more value you're going to get in terms of consumer surplus and other kinds of things. So my goal in this is always to look at ways that we can improve that, whether that's, as I say, by closing the digital divide, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or whether it's just getting more technology, more faster, cheaper, smaller technology out there. To me, that all comes under the same category here of infrastructure.
Okay, I'd now like to show a couple slides from Rebecca. I don't know if we're able to do that. I'll tee up.
Oh, I have them.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Somebody has them.
Why don't you tell us quickly about these slides, and then we'll go into a question related to them.
Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about as we were prepping for this panel was, the issues about the digital divide. And we've got a lot of good news, which is 5G deployment, which is our cable deployment, but we still have too many people in the country who don't have connectivity. And I like to think of it in terms of connectivity rather than just the networks themselves, because the networks aren't an end in themselves. Obviously, they're to get people connected. So the problem is the remaining challenges are tough. If they were easy, either for deployment or adoption, we'd have solved them by now. So on the issue of the supply side or the network deployment in terms of the digital divide, this first slide shows that it's a point that Jonathan made and that Chairman Pai made earlier, which is the remaining unserved areas in this country are going to be very challenging and difficult and expensive to deploy to. And part of that is because of the population density in this country. The urbanicity is low compared to other countries. So you see here how much less dense it is in this country as compared to some of the European countries. And what that means basically is full deployment. The enemy of full deployment is population density, and so we need to overcome that. In this shows, I did the slide because I have a hard time absorbing numbers, and so I assume some other people do too. In the US, what this shows is that only 2% of the country in urban areas lacks access to broadband, and 30% in rural areas lack access to broadband. So it really shows that this is, at this point, deployment, the supply side is a rural problem. The trend line's moving in the right direction. So if you see the dates from 2013 to 16 in the rural areas, the number of people who don't have access fell by about a half. And so we're making very, very significant progress. I would just point out as an aside, and this goes to what Chairman Pai was talking about, in this country, tribal land deployment is a real shame. I mean, we don't talk about that, I think, as a country often enough, my personal view, and this shows how they are struggling to get access, which is a point that Chairman Pai emphasized. So, and this, by the way, these are the speeds here for 25. So our view, we had done a white paper around the time of the election looking at how we can get deployment out, and the basic principles we came up with were make sure that you're focusing, it's going to take federal money. It's going to take subsidies or state or local money to get deployment out to the unserved areas. There's not a market case for this yet. And so when we've got federal money or any kind of public money going in, make sure that you're focusing the subsidies on the unserved areas so that you don't waste it on places that are already served. Use competitive mechanisms of reverse auction so that you get the most bang for the buck on the money, so that you're forcing people to say, I can serve this many people for this amount of money and give them that money. Make it not tied to a particular technology or particular type of service provider. And then realize that a lot of over time, the solution will come from technology advances, either wireless to these folks, satellite services that are getting better all the time, and so we need to keep an eye on that. The second point, quickly, I'll make about connectivity is the adoption or demand side is equally challenging. It's deeply integrated into issues of poverty, of education, of race, and these structural problems are much harder to tackle. But in this country, the biggest predictor of whether you are adopting, subscribing when you have broadband access is primarily age and education. We now have nearly 3 times as many people have access but don't take broadband as do, and Blair has made this comment before about you can solve the 3% or the 30% problem. The numbers have changed a little bit, but the order of magnitude is about the same. So I think for us, we would say that the same, you need to solve or attack the problem the same way, which is figure out who's not adopting, then figure out how to serve them to get connectivity. And just a point here on adoption, it is, there's no simple magic bullet to this. You've got to come up with ways to make sure that people want to subscribe to the internet. John Horrigan, who I think is here, has done some good research on this. And Blair and Larry have done some writing about how it's important to get government services on to get people onto the network. We at Comcast have started a program now about 7 years ago, Internet Essentials, which does low-income families, and now we've expanded it to all veterans, where you get a low-priced subscription, you get a low-priced computer, and you get free digital literacy training. And so we just announced about a week or two ago that we've signed up 6 million people. And it is not easy, I have to tell you. And anybody who wants to talk more to us about partnering on that, we're very happy to do it. But those remaining people who aren't on, there's a reason why they're not on, and it's hard to get at them, but we're making progress. Surprisingly, last year had the highest rate of new subscribers. We had 2 million, which was, I don't know why that is, but it's encouraging anyway. So that's the connectivity digital divide.
Okay, I'd like to now start with David, and we'll open up to any other panelists here who want to talk about this. I want to kind of zoom out a little bit and talk a little more about the digital divide. Last year here at TPI, I moderated a panel about that issue. And it's a very tricky problem. I think a lot of what Rebecca said was, and indeed what the slides showed, was reflected there. I'm just curious, we'll start with David. Can you tell us, are there any reasons to be optimistic about further narrowing this divide, about reaching those who, for whatever reason, are not taking it? Do we have any new things just generally in the pipeline? And if there are any plugs you want to put in for anything that Verizon is doing specifically, that's great.
Sure. So to me, one of the things that I'm most excited about and that I'm most impressed by is the way that smartphones have become a really viable primary, if not only, means of getting broadband access and really being able to participate fully in the digital economy. The latest stats that I've seen show that about 10% of the population uses smartphones as their only form of broadband internet access. And that's something that at one time might have been a disadvantage, but as the smartphones have themselves become much more usable and then the online services have been reshaped to focus their usability to the smartphones that people prefer to use. We've seen the difference between smartphone access and PC access narrow, and so that people are able to fully participate using that. So I'm encouraged by that, and I expect to see that continue, and smartphone access is often the primary, if not only, means for lower income folks to access broadband in their homes or on the go. The other thing I think, though, that offers some promise is with 5G, bringing new competitive alternatives to people for very high-speed services in the gigabit range, I think is going to be empowering and create new opportunities as well.
Okay, and any more comments from the panelists here about just additional steps? I also have a question about Lifeline, but we'll if there's time, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Lee, and then we'll go to Larry.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think that's this slide. I think it's very good. Yeah, have a whole picture of America for the digital divide. And I would like to take this opportunity to share some information about the digital divide in China. As you know, that China is a very large country and is a developing country. So in China, we have many poor people cannot access to the broadband network. And from the 2015, the Chinese government to launch the 3 batches for the broadband penetration project. And in these 3 years, I think a lot of progress has been made. And by March of this year, 95% of these poor villages have been accessed to the broadband network. And by the end of this year, and the 98% of these poor villages will access to the broadband network. So I think this is our first job, that to build the broadband network to access to these rural areas. And the second one, we think that is to lower the price, to let these poor people that to provide the affordable service to these poor people for the providers such as Comcast that you mentioned just now. That the operators now to lower the prices, the ratio I think maybe to lower maybe the 90% the prices from 2014 and to now. So I think this is a very big step for the operators and for the administrations. And the third one, I think, is very, very important is training the poor people, because the poor people don't know how to use this broadband broadband service, and the government and the operators to train these poor people to use by the mobile phone, by the PC, the terminals, to use the e-commerce and the e-education. All of these services can help the poor people to earn money and to know what is the situation, what they have changes in outside, such as for the poor village teachers, that they can use the broadband network to access to the some online education license. I think this is very, very helpful. So I think the digital-wide, I think is for Chinese government also is a very tough job, but they are taking a great effort to fill the digital gap. So I think your slide, I think is very good, and maybe in China we will. Maybe next year we can have a chance to show some slides. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds a lot like some of the stuff we've been talking about in the U.S., some parts of it. That's very helpful. Okay, Larry, what would you like to add?
Well, I think we should at least acknowledge that the good news is, over the last 10 years in particular, a great deal of what we thought of as the digital divide, or we initially thought of as the digital divide, has been erased. So if you look at both access and adoption, sort of both the supply side and the demand side, distinctions in terms of adoption based on race or based on gender have largely disappeared. They're very, very close. And so what we've got now is a very different set of problems. They're certainly challenging, and in fact, some of them may be more challenging just because of some of the things that have already been mentioned. But on the supply side, we have some very promising things going on in terms of serving the unserved and the severely underserved populations that have been mentioned, either through fixed wireless, 5G, maybe in longer term satellite, low orbiting satellite. And that's great. I mean, that really sort of brings in the possibility of true intermodal competition between wired and wireless. And by the way, David's talking about smartphones, but it's tablets also is a very important part of the mobile users. And the difference between a tablet and a PC it becomes less and less all the time. The bigger problem is on the demand side. We have essentially now kind of picked off most of the low-hanging fruit in terms of who will adopt, even if they can. And just looking at sort of the last Pew survey on this in 2013 and the NTIA survey that went to 2015, there's a really disturbing set of numbers. The 2015 NTIA survey, we have of the people who don't use the internet at all, 55% of them say their main reason for not using the internet is it's not relevant to them. So they would not take it at any cost. Now, I think that's wrong. I mean, I think they're wrong in the sense I think it is relevant to them, and that in fact we've done a very poor job of educating them on the value of the internet. But going back to what I said about Metcalfe's law, we need those voices. And if you look at who those voices are, it's older Americans, it's rural Americans, it's less educated Americans, and folks on tribal lands, obviously, as well. We need those people in this digital conversation. So solving that demand side problem is really important. And as Rebecca hinted, Blair and I did a piece a couple of years ago about ways to stimulate those digital refuseniks. And one of the most important things that Blair acknowledged was that the main thing that all those different demographic groups have in common is they're all very significant users of government services. And most of the government services they use are not online or are not easy to use online. And that's sort of one of the best ways to close that demand side problem was to put those government services online, make them easy to use, and in some ways, that would go a far way, I think, to solving the relevance problem.
And I would add to that. I mean, I think what Rebecca said about the demand side is a big issue. I'm sort of an anomaly in analysts. I don't live in New York, and I do spend some time in rural America. And people there's a $300 problem if you bring them broadband. You can do whatever you want and get it to their homes. If they don't have a device, they're not going to want it. They have plenty of time. So low broadband speeds, they get time to wait, but they don't have money. And so, and the solution I often see proposed is municipal broadband. Says, well, we'll just build it ourselves. And I have fun tracking those because they spectacularly fail. I would argue that capital is much better spent subsidizing tablets or other access devices, which eventually I think people will sit there. Think about the pay-per-view that you're like, why would I ever need that? And now, and 6 months later, you finally tried it once, and now you suddenly see more relevance to it, and your kids aren't in school. They're probably blistering your credit cards right now with it right now. But the point is, if people have access to this and you make it easier for them, especially subsidizing the demand, the carriers will beat a path to their door to sell to them, and that is a big part of the adoption. I really don't think it's nearly enough in this conversation.
I'd like to, actually, why don't we switch to Lifeline for a minute, and then we'll turn to some other infrastructure issues. As many audience members are probably aware, the FCC has proposed switching gears in some ways on Lifeline to narrow the type of people, type of companies that can resell it. The goal here is to combat what's called waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. It's been pretty controversial. A couple other conventions I've been to, NARUC would be an example, very controversial there among state telecommunications regulators. Anyway, what I'd like to ask the panelists again is there any expectation that the FCC might shift its course a bit regarding Lifeline and resellers, and how important are these resellers who are not basically the legacy telcos or carriers in providing this Lifeline, federally subsidized broadband and I guess phone as well service?
So I think that the resellers actually do play an important role, and so I would like to see that reconsidered. I think that particularly in the mobile space, a lot of the prepaid mobile services are offered by resellers. We of course have our own, but that is a useful mechanism for people to get low-cost access to online services, and so yeah, I do hope there is some reconsideration.
Okay. Any other, I guess, kind of controversial? Any other thoughts on even not just the proposal, but on other proposals regarding Lifeline? There's been some budget plans floated. Anything else?
Nothing to add.
No.
Okay, let me just ask the audience before I go on to more prepared questions. Any questions from the audience? If so, please stand up, and I think someone will come over to you with a microphone. All right, we'll continue. Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, here, just wait one sec for the microphone, and why don't you identify yourself, even though everyone in the room probably knows you.
It's hard to run at the high altitudes.
Thank you.
High altitude, this is normal. Richard Bennett, High Tech Forum. Couple of questions that, one of them is kind of nitpicky, but Rebecca, on your slides, you used the word access. And what I found when people talk about, the deployment problem is they'll sometimes use access to mean there's a network available there that they could connect to. And in other cases, they'll say, well, no, it means they're actually subscribed to the, and so which one of those did you mean?
When I talk about access, because I think a lot of people conflate that, and so what you sometimes see are these really, really high numbers of people who lack access, but what they're really talking about is the adoption,
Right.
the demand side. So those numbers all go to the supply side. So that's where the networks are available.
Yeah, and the other thing is the most recent data from Pew is now 20% of Americans are smartphone only. And so the previous number had been like 14. So there's been a huge increase, and it apparently took place over a period in which the economy has been pretty strong. So what do y'all think that means?
Did that stratify where it was, say, younger folks out of college that are using their smartphone and then maybe using their, parents' internet?
Yeah, they also broke it down into subcategories of income and age, but the top line number was 20%.
But if you broke that down, would you say
It was,
how much of it
I
that was
think,
inflated?
as I recall, the low-income figure was like in the 30s. And I don't remember looking at the, young people number, but traditionally it's higher than the old people number. I guess the old people have a hard time with small screens.
We generally see that you see a shift, a generational shift in adoption as people move through a life cycle, and seen a lot of people living in apartments sharing broadband and so forth. That could impact that number, and especially what we've seen is, especially with pay TV subscriptions, a lot of folks out there will just keep their parents log in and so forth, and as long as the content carriers continue to let them do that, it skews some of these subscribership figures.
I've got a question. Hopefully, I can be.
Sure. Would you mind just standing?
You want me to stand?
Would you just mind standing up?
You can
and
wait till I
just
have
for
on
those
knees to stand up.
who are streaming,
Hi.
letting people know who you are.
So I'm
Thank
Mignon
you.
Clyburn. I used to be somebody. So my question is more of, I guess investment oriented. I'm wondering, looking at auction design, particularly one that I know I push for smaller, economic areas. I'm wondering if that's been a positive or a negative when it comes to investment, in terms of capital as well as, I guess you would say, build. Closing that, infrastructure gap.
Rebecca may have some more direct involvement with that.
Has that been a positive or negative when it comes?
I haven't. It hasn't. It's hard for me to see, right? So if I look at a large national carrier to see that's on a relative basis, the amount that they're deploying is relatively small in those areas, so it doesn't move the needle. So it's harder for me to see. I do know that they are all the carriers want to sell to customers, regardless of the size. But these are expensive networks to build. And this is where I think the FCC really got it right with the CAF2 auctions and how they deployed that. And I think that is still coming slower than I would like to see it happen, but it is happening. They are deploying that, and I think the sell-through rate on that is going to be as high or higher than what the FCC looked at. But it's hard for investors to see it because these companies are so large to see those smaller factors. But Rebecca may have some more granular detail on that.
No, I mean, David probably does more, but just I'm looking back to my prior life before I came to Comcast and was working with Blair and followed the auctions more closely, and my sense as of that time was that it's very important to have a mix of everything. So you want to have just a lot of variety of spectrum sizes, both in terms of the geography and in terms of the bandwidth, and as long as you're doing that, the government's able to do that. I think you largely end up being able to provide the flexibility to the folks that are building out. And as you know so well, it's every auction comes in at a particular moment in time with a bunch of different variables that affect it, and so there's just so much variability in terms of what gets used and what gets paid for any given auction at any given time.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with Rebecca. The mix is important. Certainly, the nationwide 700 megahertz C block was important for Verizon when we rolled out 4G LTE. But really, after the auction, it's really the secondary market transactions, that really matter, and so how that gets then, broken up, sold, recombined, is all important too. And so having an efficiently operating secondary market for spectrum is important.
And could I just add one other point to that, which is I think it's also important, and my company, of course, uses Wi-Fi, uses the unlicensed spectrum a great deal, but I think in addition to the mix, you want to have a mix of licensed and unlicensed as well. And so much of Cisco did a report recently that showed that there's an offload, about 60% of the mobile traffic is offloaded onto an unlicensed Wi-Fi fixed wireless, and so you need to have that combination in there as well, I think, for efficiency.
And if you allow me a follow-up, Ms. Liu?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the digital literacy initiatives that you had, that you were speaking about in the rural areas. Can you give me more context in terms of numbers and scope and reach? I'm curious as to, how labor intensive that is and the types of, I guess in 30 seconds or less. I'm looking at John.
So I would to answer your question that in China, for the adjustment that we have a lot of poor areas, that you maybe ask is how large of these areas. Maybe in China we have in this project the first 3 batches we have the 130,000 administrative village, and among these 130,000. 43,000 poor villages. So, and in these 3 years, through these 3 batches project, we have finished 95%, on this March. And by the end of this year, we will finish the 98%. And in this June, we have initiated the 4th batch of the broadband access project. And this project, this 4th project focus on the 4G network. And in the 3 previous one, it's just for the fixed broadband, not access. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I don't see any more audience questions. I wanted to move on. Oh, sorry, if you could stand up and identify yourself.
Greg Rostrom from Stanford. I promise this will not be as contentious as my last question. So I was, thinking, wanting to get your perspective, since you have different, mainly the 3 people in the middle, but all the others can comment as well, on how we're getting to the next generation, the mix of wired and wireless, how those will work together. When will we get to 5G? Is 5G hyper reality, and how long will it take to get to 50% 5G, or what will it do to people's ability to get online?
So I can take just the first part of that and then turn it over to Dave.
Great question, by the way. You took one of mine, so that's great. If you want to come up here.
So I think what we're seeing, which is interesting, both from a practical and I think a theoretical perspective, is a convergence of the architecture of the networks increasingly over time. So what cable did was took big fat pipes, fatter, bigger pipes all the time to people's homes, and then now what we're doing is dumping it off on a Wi-Fi network, so a wireless network when you get into the homes. What 5G is doing is also taking big fat pipes into basically the pole or whatever is going to be the antenna, and then dropping it off and doing wireless at the back end of that over the whatever bands they're going to be using for 5G. So a real similarity of the architecture of what had been quite dissimilar, I would say, systems. And what that means from a policy perspective, I would argue, is that we're getting what had been intermodal competition has worked in this country, I would say, very well compared to Europe largely and what they've experienced. And what it means for policies going forward is that I think the government needs to be very careful about making sure that in the effort to support the 5G deployment, that whatever they're doing to liberalize and streamline that effort applies equally to both sets of companies that are trying to deploy, so you don't have a competitive distortion.
Yeah, so echoing what Rebecca said, wireline infrastructure is critical for 5G. So it is going to require a massive deployment of fiber to those small cells. The small cell architecture is really important. That is what we're using today to densify our 4G networks, to layer on additional capacity to keep up with the ever-growing demand from our customers. That same small cell infrastructure will support 5G. And one of the key challenges with 5G and using the millimeter wave bands is the propagation of those signals is limited. And so you need many more antennas in order to provide full coverage within an area. On the positive side, through our field trials, we found that the propagation and the performance in the real world is actually much better than we had expected it to be from a theoretical standpoint. And so, we're seeing, good throughput over much longer distances than originally anticipated. The line of sight issues are less of an issue because we're able to get usable signals from reflections. And so, all of this means that 5G is going to happen quickly, and we're putting the gas on the accelerator full speed to make that happen as quickly as possible. I won't provide any predictions about when we get to 50%, but
Can I just jump? So, and not to pick on David in any sense, but I'd also be curious to hear actually Frank's view on this. My sense, as an engineer, I always want the latest, greatest new thing. I'm always really turned on by that. But my sense is that that the carriers and the equipment providers, so far they've done a really, sorry to say, a very poor job of selling the business case, the use case for 5G, certainly to consumers. And I'm wondering, from Frank's standpoint, in terms of Wall Street, so this is an issue I've been on for a while now. I think that there are really compelling use case stories to be told, and of course, we don't know how soon telehealth is coming, or virtual reality is coming, or smart cities. But all of these next generation applications will certainly rely on 5G. But I think to answer your question of when, part of the when is not technical at all. It's really when we can make the sales pitch to both consumers to adopt and to Wall Street to allow the extremely high cost of investment that's going to be necessary.
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on that. I don't think we necessarily ever get to 50% 5G. These are extremely expensive networks. We hosted a conference last week at 3 of the major carriers there and effectively admitted that they would be spending this money if there is no new business case. I can certainly think of some applications that require low latency that you can't do today, but those are there's not a whole lot of revenue associated with that. So 5G effectively is going to be the first wireless technology that cannibalizes other wireless networks. And I look at it from a user perspective. I don't see what you're incrementally going to get from a 5G service, especially mobile services, than you didn't get on LTE. 4G LTE was a game changer. When I can take my laptop and I can go sit at my kid's ball field and have the same experience as my desktop, and while I'm there, that changes how you changes your life. If you magnify that speed by 10 times, it's not going to make a difference. I'm still going to be doing the same thing. So I don't see where the carriers have not been able to really articulate a lot of demand, other than maybe in some spotted areas cannibalizing some cable fixed broadband and so forth. But to David's point about the propagation characteristics, this millimeter wave that really carries the high throughput, okay, that makes it very, very challenging, especially in rural areas. Now, I do think putting it on 600 megahertz and 800 megahertz, you can get 5G out there, it'll have better speeds, but I don't know that's anything different. And when the carriers are effectively admitting that they would be spending this just to kind of tread water, I just think it's a lot of hype. And it's not necessarily going to be realistic for a few more years. And then you also have to deal with the fact that the physics will dictate that the wired networks can always put more throughput through than the wireless networks. And as we found out, speed sells, okay? You can talk about gigabits and 500 megabit speeds. I can show you a video I've got on my phone from where a 10 meg DSL connection, and I'm running 4 separate video streams, and I've still got to do a speed test. I've still got 2 megs of data left. My cable friends don't like to necessarily hear that, but speed is kind of a misnomer. So I don't know that customers necessarily need all of that, and I think it's going to be a long time before that really deployed. I'm sure there are new use cases. I can think of plenty of low latency type applications that you won't be able to do without it, and I'm sure that they will be. I'm just not sure that it's going to be as profitable again. So this, for the first time with this, I think the carriers are going to invest a lot of money and get a lower return for it. So we're fairly skeptical about especially the near term impact of 5G.
So if I may, when we made the transition from 3G to 4G LTE, and as I said before, Verizon was the first to really push that. And at the time, we were told, this is a really dumb idea. You just deployed 3G. Why do you need 4G? Would 10 times faster wireless really make your flip phone better? Would your ringtones download faster? Would that picture message go faster? The standards weren't quite ready yet. WiMAX was the mature, safe bet. But we pushed the envelope then, and it enabled use cases. Before 4G, nobody would have anticipated Uber or Airbnb or all of the things that the mobile app economy has enabled. And similarly, I think yes, making your laptop run 10 times faster at your kid's ball game is probably not a world-changing use case, but having very high throughput capabilities, having very low latency capabilities, being able to support hundreds of times more devices by the networks that will truly enable the Internet of Things. By being able to allow low power devices that can operate for 10 years on a battery so they can be embedded in infrastructure. These are the types of things I think that are going to enable new use cases that, quite frankly, we can't really think of or predict what the breakthrough ones are going to be. But I have no doubt that there will be breakthrough use cases that are going to be enabled by this new technology.
I don't really disagree with that as much as that from my perspective, I just look at it from what investors are doing, where you taking the capital and what return you get. And I don't disagree that there are millions, if not billions, of those devices, but if they're pennies a month or low single dollars a month, it doesn't look like it's an attractive use case. It'll be cool stuff, but I'm not sure that the investment case is there. That's just from my perspective.
Yeah, I think such kind of discussion also occurred in China. Yeah, from the beginning of the 5G, some people will ask this question: what applications should be provided by 5G? And in this year's studies, that we do have some challenges for the 5G. I think the first one is the frequency. I think last night we also have discussions about in America that for 3.5 gigahertz, this broadband, this band. In China, we also have some such kind of discussions that what frequency band should be provided for the 5G, because from the 3G, 4G to 5G, I think it's very difficult for the global world, for all of this country to find the common frequency spectrum. This is the first challenge. For the second challenge, because different countries and different scenario, different cases, I think maybe makes the high-low frequency used in the city or in the other areas. So I think maybe this is very complicated for the networking deployment for the operators. But regardless of all of these challenges, we think that 5G is very, very useful for our daily life and for the industry's use. Because 5G have some additional use cases, not only for the human communication, but also to apply the 5G to the IoT, the Internet of Things, to the industry, to the healthcare, and to the power. All of these industries need the 5G. And another point, I think that the 5G in the application, because we cannot imagine now that what application should be provided by 5G. This situation occurred in the fourth generation, because in fourth generation we also have some such kind of discussion. What applications should be held for 4G, such as virtual reality and others, such as healthcare. In some months ago, I introduced 5G technology to the doctors. That's the doctors that they are very looking forward to the 5G for the remote such as to operation. Yeah, all of this, I think application need 5G. So this is my understanding.
Wow, this was great. I just want to, Rebecca, if I may, I just want to ask if you have any other thoughts. Obviously, Comcast is different from Verizon in this, but is it going to be? I mean, this is a big question that when I've moderated other panels, other conferences about 5G, it's very hard to sort out what's going to happen. There's a range of predictions. So I don't know if you have thoughts on, are we going to see quicker uptake? Is it going to take a while for these different use cases to kind of play out, and for consumers and for that matter businesses to be convinced to to pay a little more for those services?
Yeah, I think the answer personally is that nobody knows yet. I think that we're talking about a deployment and a take-up that's further out in terms of time than anybody can reliably predict. And so I think a lot of it is we'll know more in a couple of years than we do now. I think from a network operator perspective, the point that Frank emphasizes is critical, that you need to be able to get a return on that investment in order to be able to keep on doing the investment. And so there's always a match or a multifaceted question when you're doing this. It's true for us too in terms of building out gig networks. There's a technical aspect in terms of what is that going to allow, what new services, what new cool things that turn Larry on are we going to be able to be making available, and then the question is, and who will pay for that? I remember years and years and years ago, I think I just left the FCC, and there was Booz Allen with a very high end. I think they had surveyed maybe about, it was in the thousands, 2,000 people, so a pretty reliable study, and they asked people, what is it that you would like? And they gave a whole bunch of different services and products, and would that be something you would like? And everybody says, yeah. And then Booz Allen asked them, and would you pay for it? And the answer was no, right? And so I think that's a big unknown.
Probably my final question, and actually before I ask it, this will be probably the last opportunity. We're going to wrap up in just a few minutes, actually ahead of schedule. Any further audience questions? I think they've been really good so far. Okay, I just wanted to ask the panelists generally, those who feel they can weigh in, about the impact of deal making. We've heard a lot at TPI Aspen about the regulatory aspects of antitrust law and other areas, but what's the impact of the deals that are in the pipeline and those that have been completed? We have AT&T Time Warner completed. We have T-Mobile Sprint in the pipeline. We have a lot of programming deals. Some of these may not have too much of an impact, but of all the deals that have recently been completed and those that are envisioned, how's this going to affect digital infrastructure? Getting people more broadband services, that sort of thing. Any kind of broad predictions of 5G aside, what we're going to see in the next few years because of the consolidation in the telecommunications sector?
Frank.
I'll start off. Yeah, so look, I think the consolidation has been positive. I think AT&T has got a very strategy with what they're doing with Time Warner versus what Verizon's taking their strategy, and it's about looking at ways of, you have telecom companies who have some parts of the business that are dying, parts of it aren't growing very much, and they're trying to diversify and leverage those networks and utilizing advertising dollars and trying to change the paradigm there on how you leverage advertising, how you leverage it across multiple devices and lower churn. Effectively, that's what the Time Warner acquisition is all about. Can you lower churn across 100 million customers? Comcast is doing the same thing with their wireless service. It's a science experiment for now to find out, can they wrap wireless in and lower churn? If they can, then that's really important. I don't specifically cover T-Mobile and Sprint. Another colleague of mine at Raymond James covers those, but that's an important transaction. Look, Sprint's got a problem. Sprint's issue is they have not built their network, and that is going to run into a wall. And absent this transaction, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to continue to operate. You put the two companies together, they will see investment. They have to invest. whether it's just to tread water, as I surmised before, or to be able to grow and expand the business and be more competitive. I think without it, you're going to have two very large, well-capitalized competitors that are going to provide a service that people may not want to only have two choices, but reluctantly, if you want something reliable, that's what they'll do. And that this is a chance to have a third. T-Mobile can try, but they'll only be as effective in certain pockets. I do think the aspect of the Sprint T-Mobile merger and looking at rural areas is an important part. And we've talked, this has come up multiple times. It can be part of the solution in rural areas where we probably should be more fixed wireless connection, and we probably never would have built it this way in the past if we'd had wireless 50 years ago. So I think that's a very important transaction. I hope that it goes through. We think that that there's a better likelihood that it will at Raymond James. But I think more of these getting rid of some of the inefficiencies in the market with these being split up it makes a lot of sense over the long term.
So I'm unconstrained in responding to these questions. So I agree with everything that Frank just said. Certainly on Sprint T-Mobile, I mean, I don't see this as going from 4 national carriers to 3. I see this as going from 2 national carriers to 3. All the reasons that Frank mentioned, particularly the weakness of Sprint's infrastructure. So in fact, we get more, if this deal goes through, we get more competition. We get an actual strong competitor to Verizon and AT&T. I also think you can't, we talk about consolidation in the communications market, but it's now, you can't separate out the changes in the media market as well. All these deals are really going after the same thing, and I think you sort of narrow it down to 3 words. The 3 words are content is king. Whether it's on mobile devices, or whether it's streaming services, it's whether, one of the big applications that will be for 5G. It's all video. And we have, we're lucky to be living in the platinum age of content because, we have all these new sources and we have all these new services, new ways of enjoying it, new forms of it, user-generated content. The way that especially millennials create their own, they don't really distinguish between Instagram and Twitch and YouTube and network television. This is all for them, it's just all content, and they don't see that as distinct. So I think a lot of the media deals are really a function of the fact that the incumbent distributors, the MVPDs, in particular, operate under a tremendous set of weird regulations that go back 30, 40 years and just sort of been accreted and ossified during that period. Most of them, nobody would defend the current list as saying, yes, this is absolutely the best way to do it. We can't agree on how to clear the decks or how much of the decks to clear. But in the interim, while the MVPDs operate under one regulatory model and the OTTs like Netflix and so on operate under a very different, much lighter regulatory model, the content is everything, and you're going to see more and more efforts to get content because all these new applications, all the new devices, all the new network technology, in some ways it boils down to I want my MTV.
I think this is a great place to close. Laura Martin, who wasn't here, another analyst who's supposed to be, I believe, she talks about a lot of this too, content is king and the M&A trends. I think this is a great panel. I have an 11:20 a.m. flight, so I'm sorry I have to end this early, but I'll keep you all on time. Great questions, and please round of applause for the panelists.
All right, thanks very much for a really interesting panel. We're running a little bit ahead, so let's take a break and be back here at 10:30 for the next panel.
Chris, can we get a picture of all this while we still